Welcome you to the COPD Foundation's Bronchiectasis and NTM 360 presentation of 2024 World Bronchiectasis Day virtual roundtable event, expert opinions on clinical research in honor of World Bronchiectasis Day. As an organization, we recognize and celebrate World Bronchiectasis each year on July 1st. My name is Johnny Karinko. I am a respiratory therapist and the manager of public and professional education here at the COPD Foundation. I will moderate today's discussion. We are glad that you have joined us and you want to learn more about research and how it impacts people that are living with bronchiectasis. Before we begin our presentation today, let me first introduce our panel. First, we have Dr. Axmit. He's the medical director for Bronchiectasis and NTM 360 at the COPD Foundation and an associate professor of medicine at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. We also have Dr. McShane, who's a professor of medicine at UT Tyler School of Medicine, and Dr. Chalmers, who's a clinical professor of molecular and clinical medicine at the University of Dundee. We want to thank all of these accomplished physicians for sharing their expertise in bronchiectasis and clinical research. We are also extremely fortunate to have two patient panelists. Barbara is from the United Kingdom, and John is from the United States. Our leading physicians in bronchiectasis care, along with our patient panel, will discuss research and clinical studies and their impacts on bronchiectasis community. Now let's get this conversation started. I want to start with you first, Dr. Axmit. How does research impact how bronchiectasis is diagnosed and treated?
Thank you very much, and really do appreciate being here and able to participate in the World Bronchiectasis Day 2024 celebration. We've previously raised awareness. We've talked about treatment, and this year's emphasis is on research. And it's important that with my colleagues to share perspectives that research is the nidus, if you will, to actually move the ball forward, to advance the science, and to really begin to address an unmet need. By participating in research, and whether that's in a lab or in a clinic or in another global level, really will help us all move forward and increase our understanding of why bronchiectasis occurs and what we can do about it. So I would shout out to all those listening. Thank you for your support, your participation, your efforts, and whether it's patients, caregivers, investigators, or other clinicians, we're all dependent on you to move forward. So thank you, and I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. How about you, Dr. McShane?
I think, the research as part of our field and practicing in the clinic room with the patient always has to be present. We have to keep in mind that the disease evolves, the patients evolve, and we must always keep asking questions. I think the patients appreciate it to hear that our finger is on the pulse, that we're constantly reading, we're constantly learning about our disease. And one of the things that I think has been really rewarding about bronchiectasis is that we have a really good relationship with our basic scientists and our clinicians. So, for example, we just came from this American Thoracic Society conference where we had multiple sessions where basic science was mentioned in the same hour as clinical, practice. These two fields must connect. It's very rare to have someone who can do cutting edge basic science and be a very good clinician. And perhaps Professor Chalmers is one of the unique people who can do both. But for most of us, we invest our time in one field or the other, basic science or clinical practice. And it takes a career to be good at both. But the beautiful thing about our field is that we have such a good communication between the research and the clinical practitioners. I think this is to be celebrated, especially on a day like July 1st, World Bronchiectasis Day.
Absolutely. And what about your unique perspective, Dr. Chalmers?
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me, and happy World Bronchiectasis Day. It's a real pleasure to be involved. I see research as being the core to making progress in bronchiectasis. It is the most fundamental thing when you're dealing with a disease that has been neglected for decades, and where until recently we had very little data on which to base the decisions that we have to make every day in clinical practice. Patients want to know, why have I developed bronchiectasis? So the only way we develop tests that can answer that question is through research. Patients want to know, what's the best way for me to manage my condition? The only way to answer that question properly is to do research and investigate which things patients can do that make the best difference for their quality of life. And then on treatment, we've used, when we look at our registries, doctors around the world use dozens of different treatments for patients with bronchiectasis, many of which have very little evidence. And you go and see one doctor, you get a different treatment to if the same patient goes and sees a different doctor. The only way we can make that fair and equitable and evidence-based for our patients is to do research and find the best treatments by generating the best evidence. So I see research as something that's absolutely fundamental to providing the best possible care for patients with bronchiectasis.
So John, I saw your head nodding along while they were talking. So why does how does this impact you as a patient?
Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here with some of the best researchers and clinicians, and with Barbara today for World Bronchiectasis Day. How it affects me and how it affects other patients is that the research these fine doctors are doing today filters down to the front line. And over time, we have a better program, we have better knowledge base, we'll get better care, but it takes somebody on the leading edge to keep driving this research, keep finding new things so that our Main Street clinician will be able to help us in the future.
Absolutely. So Barbara, do you have the same opinion or any other thoughts to add?
Oh, yes, absolutely. The thing is, I don't think we are feeling the impact quite yet, but we are absolutely on the brink of getting new treatments, which is amazing after so many decades of the condition being neglected. It's going to be such good news for bronchiectasis patients who often despair of ever getting any improvement in their symptoms. And so, yes, it's so, I feel so optimistic about the future, because I've had bronchiectasis all my life, and I've not seen any improvement in treatment in decades. So yes, I'm full of enthusiasm for all that the researchers and doctors are doing for us. It's great.
Excellent, thank you. So Dr. Chalmers, before we were talking, you were kind of updating some of the patient panelists on some updates in research. So what are the main areas of research currently, and what issues do you think we still need to address in bronchiectasis, and how are we working to tackle those issues?
Yeah, if I could briefly come back on what Barbara was saying, she's absolutely right that often it takes a long time for research to feed through to the patient's experience. The way I think about it is sort of the way you would draw a beautiful picture is you don't immediately have the beautiful picture in front of you. You have to sit there for a long time drawing each of the lines and each of the colors, and at the end you have the product and you say, okay, that's the product, and it's powerful and it's beautiful. And it's the same with research. Every little study is a step forward or a brick in the wall that ultimately builds up into something that's really impactful for patients. And that's what we see at the moment in bronchiectasis, is a lot of the foundations have been set, a lot of the fundamental research has been done to understand the condition a bit better. And as Barbara says, I think we're now on the threshold of completing the picture and having those breakthrough therapies. And I was updating you before we started that on Tuesday, the 28th of May, so just a while ago now for World Bronchiectasis Day, we announced the results of a large phase 3 trial, which is the ASPEN trial of a new anti-inflammatory medicine for bronchiectasis. And that's something that inflammation in bronchiectasis is something that many of us have been researching for more than 15 years. And finding out lots of things about the fundamentals of the disease. But finally, we have a treatment that targets that. And the phase 3 trial reported that treatment with this once daily tablet reduced the frequency of exacerbations, and at the highest dose also reduced symptoms and slowed down the progression of the disease measured by lung function. So that's a really major breakthrough for people with bronchiectasis. And we hope that'll be the first of many breakthroughs, because there's more trials now than there's ever been before. Because of that, the fundamental research and the foundations have been set that have helped us to identify what are the treatments that are likely to work. So I think it really is, as Barbara said, on the cusp of really impacting patients.
And I might just piggyback on to both Professor Chalmers and Dr. McShane's comments, as well as John and Barbara's. This is a story. It's yet to be untold in the sense of it needs to play out, and this is a process. And what I would give those listening here some encouragement that we feel that bronchiectasis is manageable, it is treatable, but it does require additional work, and we have to do better. We understand that we're not where we need to be. Having said that, as Dr. Chalmers outlined, this is a process to work on developing new technologies, new treatments, and that it starts with small investigations, and then this large phase 3 study, as was mentioned, really involves tens of millions of dollars and patients around the world, and it's a very large project before it then hopefully will get approved by the FDA. And currently there are no, at least in the US, approved drugs for bronchiectasis, and we're all hopeful that there are a number of studies coming down the pipeline. And so I again encourage our listeners that this is something that's in an active process of development. We're more encouraged today than we've been in decades, literally. And I think that there's really reason to have hope that what the future will bring is more effective therapies and hopefully improvement in quality of life. Having said that, again, just to emphasize for our listeners and our patients and caregivers, it is manageable, and we should start with the simple things first. And I'll turn it over to Dr. McShane or John or Barbara or Professor Chalmers.
I think one thing that we can look forward to in the next years as a bronchiectasis community is that I think there's a need from the patient standpoint to understand what is the best therapy. What I think the basic scientists are trying to do in bronchiectasis is to make this not the best one-size-fits-all treatment for all patients, but to make this a customized, and I'm sort of stepping on Professor Chalmers' toes here because this has been a focus of his research in the last years, is to make this customized and very targeted, because bronchiectasis is such a heterogeneous disease. But I think it's important that patients pursue a specialist in bronchiectasis so that they can really be analyzed and interviewed, and the specialist can understand how their bronchiectasis is unique compared to everyone. Because most certainly, I think what is to come in our field is that we are going to have customized, targeted therapy for unique types of bronchiectasis, and it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach.
And I might just take this opportunity to give a shout out to Dr. Chalmers and maybe have him comment on how individualized this is, given the heterogeneity of bronchiectasis as a disease.
I absolutely agree with what Professor McShane and Professor Exumet say. This is a very complex disease, and if you speak to patients, as we all do in our clinics every week, they will all describe a different experience of their bronchiectasis. They have different problems. Some have their biggest problem is the cough and the sputum. Other patients, the biggest problem is the frequent exacerbations. Others, it's the breathlessness. It's obvious when you spend time with patients that the solution is not going to be a one-size-fits-all or one drug that's going to solve all of these different problems. We have to approach bronchiectasis as a complex disease with multiple, what I call treatable traits. There's multiple different aspects of the disease. all of them are potentially treatable. And so your management of a bronchiectasis patient in the future is not going to be one magic drug. I think I can say that right now. No matter how good our research is, we're not going to find one beautiful drug that cures everything. It's going to be a combination of treatments, all of which are supported by research, that are carefully individualized to the patient. And most importantly, the decisions about which treatments are taken in partnership with the patient. The patient tells us what are the things that they most want to be addressed. And then the treatments are then available to tackle those problems that are experienced by each individual patient. And what the research is helping us to do is to find the biology underlying these things. Okay, I'm a patient, I'm really breathless. Why is that patient breathless? The research can help us to find out the unique causes for those individual patients and find the best treatment that's going to help that problem.
So one thing,
and if I could, I'd like to add, and I'd like to reemphasize what Dr. McShane was saying. You really, as a patient, we really need to be in the hands of a specialist who deals with this every day. When I went to my first pulmonologist, they had diagnosed me with NTM, but not said anything about bronchiectasis. And when I checked with family history and checked with my mom, she said, well, you have to ask about this other thing called bronchiectasis. I'm the one who brought bronchiectasis into the doctor appointment, and I'm convinced that pulmonologist didn't know anything about it. So he was running blind, and that's not a way to be treated. And I talk to patients every day as part of my role with the COPD Foundation, and I hear it all the time where the Main Street Clinic just doesn't have enough information and background and experience with a broad base of patients to know how best to treat them. So I absolutely recommend you need to be in the hands of a specialist.
And
absolutely.
one of the main issues that needs to be addressed is raising awareness among general practitioners and among non-specialists. I'm surprised to hear from John that was a pulmonologist who wasn't aware of the possibility of bronchiectasis. That is worrying. So we do really generally need to raise the profile of bronchiectasis wherever we can, with GPs and non-specialists in particular. Yeah.
And I might just piggyback onto 2 points. One is, as Dr. Chalmers said, this is about a programmatic issue. That is, this new research isn't just to investigate and discover new therapies once symptoms have progressed, but there's a great deal of interest and work going on with looking at predispositions, genetic predispositions to develop bronchiectasis. In the past, there's been a very large group of our patients with bronchiectasis that we call idiopathic, which means we're not smart enough to figure that out. And that, in most of our opinions, is not acceptable. That is to say, to find disease early. So it's not only about managing disease, finding new therapies for individuals that have bronchiectasis, but also to identify patients at risk so that as we move forward, we can mitigate this and not have our patients get to the point where they're as symptomatic as some of you may be. So there's a great deal of interest across a spectrum of level of disease that really is going to be important as we move forward. And there's intense interest in trying to recognize and identify individuals at risk.
Yeah, and I could maybe add on to that, just expanding on what Tim's saying. The genetics of this could be incredibly important. So I can imagine a patient sitting there going, genetics, what has this got to do with sort of impact on my daily life? But the gene that causes cystic fibrosis was only discovered in 1989. And now we have bespoke therapies that correct that genetic defect that are absolutely life-changing for people with cystic fibrosis. Bronchiectasis is not caused by one gene. It's going to be a more complex and a more difficult battle. But that technology and the ability to look at the genome and find the individual cause for an individual patient with bronchiectasis could lead to highly effective therapies for large numbers of people with bronchiectasis, just as it has for people with cystic fibrosis and other rare genetic diseases. There's been a revolution in the technology of correcting genetic problems. And so that's research that it's at the more fundamental end of the research, but it is incredibly exciting with the potential to have a huge impact on patients.
And I might just also add and then ask Dr. McShane to weigh in that when we talk about this research, as encouraged as we are, Dr. Chalmers mentioned a phase 3 study that was just completed, results released for treatment. We're talking about identifying disease early and predispositions with genetics and that. And to address the comments that John and Barbara also shared with us, under the leadership of Dr. McShane, our U.S. bronchiectasis registry, our care center network, what we're really looking to do, and it falls under the rubric of research, is to educate our colleagues, our peers, not only pulmonologists, but infectious disease doctors, our primary care doctors. And I don't know if Dr. McShane wants to comment on that, but part of the umbrella of research isn't just development of new treatments, new technologies, the genetics, but it's also the educational part. There's a research component to this that we need to move forward to try to understand how can we inform patients, caregivers, and clinicians alike. Dr. McShane, I don't know if you have questions or comments about that.
Yeah, so I think what we're doing today is probably in reality going to be the most effective way to put the rubber to the road there, and that's educating the patient. Because regrettably, I think sometimes physicians can be a little bit stuck in their ways, and they can maybe be even harder to educate sometimes than the patient. And in the United States, we have a very enriched population with non-tuberculous mycobacteria, and that particular group seems to be extremely educated, very self-advocating, and very knowledgeable about their disease. But I want to build on what John said, is they often don't realize that they have bronchiectasis, and for whatever reason, the patient sort of cohesion amongst bronchiectasis patient has yet to be as sophisticated as the one in NTM. And so this is why I'm so enthusiastic about World Bronchiectasis Day, is because really the strength is in the patient population, I think, and the communication and outreach amongst the patients, because so often it is the patient who educates their physician. There's so much good that can be done through patient outreach to each peer sort of outreach to each other. John has an incredibly meaningful role in talking with patients about airway clearance and about helping to detangle and interpret what physicians have said during their appointments. This kind of education is so powerful. And I in no way mean that we don't need to continue to try to educate our primary care colleagues, but I think it's especially meaningful what patients can do amongst themselves. And it's been seen in other diseases as well. For example, the patient population in HIV completely changed that disease after the 1980s. And so we can do this in bronchiectasis. And I'm so honored to be with John and Barbara, because they are sort of the pillars of this movement.
Well, you have to know that you've got bronchiectasis before you can start lobbying for it. And I'm afraid that the road to diagnosis can take many years for many patients who are misdiagnosed with asthma and COPD. And often the patients themselves have never heard of bronchiectasis before they finally get a diagnosis. So yeah, there's still a lot of road to be covered in diagnosis as well as lobbying for better treatments. Yeah.
And I think many of our listeners understand and hear frequently of the whole role of AI, that is artificial intelligence. And part of the research initiative for bronchiectasis is, again, early recognition of disease, and whether that's incorporating algorithms for individuals that have been diagnosed with asthma or emphysema or other problems other than bronchiectasis, to identify them early is part of the research that's being developed for early recognition, which is, again, an important component to effective therapies and mitigation.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. So how can we recommend that patients stay informed about new research developments or opportunities to participate in clinical studies related to their bronchiectasis?
Well, I can say from the patient's perspective, we have so many potential sources of information. We need to pursue all of them. So first, yes, our providers may know something about research, but we need to also go out on our own. So clinicaltrials.gov, we can constantly search by our disease names to see, are there trials we can participate in? We should be working with one of the organizations, whether it's the COPD Foundation, NTMIR, and I'm sure there are some other great organizations that keep patients abreast of latest developments. Talk amongst ourselves, find out what we can do, and keep asking for more things to be done. Tell our providers that we want more research.
Absolutely. And just Google bronchiectasis clinical trials. It works.
And I will also ask maybe my European colleagues to comment, but just a shout out to go to the World Bronchiectasis Day site. There's great resources there. The Bronchiectasis and NTM 360 site also has resources. And I know my colleagues in Australia at the Australian Lung Foundation have great resources, one of which is the Bronchiectasis Toolbox. And I'll let Dr. Chalmers or Barbara talk about the European Lung Foundation and those resources that we all have access. So as you then go out to look for this, go to the World Bronchiectasis Day site, go to the Bronchiectasis and NTM 360 site, the European sites, the Australian sites. There's great deals of resources out there. And I don't know, Barbara or Dr. Chalmers, if you want to comment on the European resources that some of our listeners may be interested in.
Yeah, so the European Lung Foundation has the Bronchiectasis Patient Priorities website, which is it's managed by the European Lung Foundation in collaboration with EMBARC, the European Bronchiectasis Registry, and it's got a lot of very useful information for patients, as well as information about ongoing clinical trials, including a graphic of the pipeline of all of the treatments that are currently in development for bronchiectasis. But I would say, in addition to sort of searching for things online and looking for that sort of information online, there's a big responsibility on us as clinicians to offer our patients the opportunity to participate in clinical trials. Our patients are great in going out there looking for information, but the best possible source of information, I think, for a patient thinking about wanting to get into research would be their clinician that they know saying, there's this clinical trial that's coming up. I think, you would be suitable for this. I think it might benefit you, and giving patients that opportunity. And it saddens me that a lot of patients who aren't cared for in specialist centers tell me it's great to hear about this research, but nobody has ever offered me the chance to take part in a clinical trial. And I think we should, as specialists, alongside all of the great science that we're doing, think about how we broaden access and make access to research more fair for our patients. Because at the moment, it does depend a lot on being lucky enough to be in the geographical region of a specialist center that's very research active.
So Dr. Chalmers, if you had a patient who you were looking to refer to a clinical research trial, what questions would you recommend that they ask, or what questions would you want to answer to make sure that they are well informed about whether or not to participate in that study?
Yeah, so one of the great things about clinical research, so for our patients that are listening, is that you can read the information about a research study, and all research studies will provide very detailed information about what's involved, what the burden is in terms of the number of visits, what the treatment is, how it works, what the potential side effects of those things would be. all of that information should be available to you before you make a decision about whether to take part in a trial. And people like me are absolutely delighted to talk through that in detail, answer all of your questions that you might have about these trials. And the most important thing to say is you can talk to us about these trials with absolutely no obligation or commitment to then go ahead and take part in the study. Yeah, there will be times that you hear about a trial, you get some information, you decide that's not for me. The treatment's not one that I'm interested in, or it's too burdensome, too many visits, I've got holidays coming up. All of these things, you don't need to feel as if there's an obligation to get involved, but ask for the information, because there might be something where you read the patient information or you discuss with your doctor and you think, yeah, that's something that really interests me. That makes sense to me. Those are questions that are of interest to me, and I'd really like to get involved. So I think that's what I say to my patients is think about research as something extra that you can get involved in if you want to, but it's completely without obligation. And it's really about something that finding something that interests you and may be a benefit to you.
As a patient, what I want to know, having been on a clinical trial, was what's the aim of the trial? What are the potential side effects? What's the treatment burden? I mean, how it'll affect your daily life? How often you'd have to attend the clinic? For how long? Would my expenses be covered? What happens if something goes wrong? Will my personal information be kept confidential? Will I be informed if you discover an unknown medical condition? And will I be told that the results at the end of the trial? Those were the key things that I wanted to know when I embarked on a clinical trial, which I've just finished. And it was a great experience. I can recommend it.
And those are fantastic questions. And those are the kinds of questions that every clinical trial should answer for you. And they will answer for you, because clinical trials are very carefully regulated by ethics committees and by regulators. And it's absolutely essential that all of those questions are addressed.
I find there are a lot of benefits to the patients that comes out of being involved in a clinical trial that are even just completely additional to the purpose of the trial. And one of them is that I get to see my patients so much more than what I would be seeing them in standard of care. I mean, typically without a clinical trial, I'll see my patient every 3 months or so, or every 6 months. But in these clinical trials, I see them sometimes monthly, and I really get to know them as people and understand, why the burden of therapy might be really, too much for them, or I get to know their hobbies and how their bronchiectasis impacts their hobbies. And I get to really have a finer gauge of how they feel from day to day, because I'm seeing them so often. They become more part of the clinic family because they're coming back and forth, and it's kind of wonderful to, we really get to know each other. And so I think that there's some patients want to minimize the impact of bronchiectasis on their life, and I understand that. They don't want to be constantly reminded that they've got bronchiectasis. But on the other hand, it's for a short period of time to be involved in a clinical trial and have the opportunity to really understand how a unique area of medicine and science works, and get to see their physician, their nurse, and their clinical coordinator more often. In the process, you've made new friends. So I think that's one of the nice things. And if I'm not talking too long, I just want to make a comment about the placebo randomization. I think that's the most common comment that patients make to me. Well, I don't mind doing the trial, but I want to receive the drug. I don't want to receive the placebo arm. And of course, as all the people who are listening probably know, the placebo is the sugar pill or the empty drug. That being randomized to that arm is very is a very important contribution to science. It's very important that all therapies are randomized to a placebo. And many of the therapies that patients reach out to that are not well researched, often because they're frustrated with the way their medicine is going, some of the internet alternative options for therapy are not studied in a placebo-controlled fashion. And without that arm of the study, we really can't answer questions. The other thing is, if they don't do the trial, they're going to get placebo for sure. So they might as, there's, not doing the trial might not be the answer to not wanting the placebo. And the other thing is, if you are randomized to the placebo, you still get the benefits of the frequent visits and the trials and having your doctor see you more often. So I would urge people to, understand that getting the placebo is still an important role, and you're still answering a question that may be very relevant to someone you love in the future. Your grandchild might have bronchiectasis, and then this question might be answered and available for your grandchild.
Yeah, just to add to PJ's comment about the placebo, there are various studies that show that people who participate in clinical trials and get the placebo group have marked improvements in symptoms, quality of life. There's even studies suggesting that there's a survival advantage in many diseases just to being in a trial, even if you get the placebo. And it's not because the sugar pill does anything. It's exactly as you said, you get better care, you get more follow-up. Things that would have been missed get picked up because of the trial assessments. So don't underestimate the power of a clinical trial, even if you get the placebo.
And Johnny, I'd like to reemphasize Barbara's questions. These are the questions that patients have. They're usually viewed from the negative. How is this going to make my life more difficult? How am I going to manage this while I'm already managing a disease? But Dr. McShane touches on the other side of that. Because we're in front of the best clinicians on a regular basis, there are undocumented things that can happen to us in the positive side. So in my case, my family's been involved in a genetic study for bronchiectasis for almost 10 years. And in the process, the doctors found my mom had a heart valve issue, and they diagnosed that, and they helped me manage some other medications. So things that we didn't come in for, because we're in front of these people, they helped us in many different ways. And you can't script that ahead of time.
Those unforeseen benefits.
There are, and it's hard to anticipate when we already are carrying such a burden of disease. But my life plan is always be surrounded by the smartest people I can find, and here they are right on the screen.
I want to thank our guests for sharing their experiences with clinical research and its impact on bronchiectasis today. And I also want to thank our community for joining us. We know that by sharing our experiences and perspectives, people living with bronchiectasis can learn more about how to better advocate for their care. Lastly, I want to say Happy World Bronchiectasis Day, everyone. World Bronchiectasis Day aims to raise global awareness, share knowledge, and discuss ways to reduce the burden of bronchiectasis for patients and their families worldwide. We thank our community for their support on this day. And if you're curious to learn more, I invite you to visit www.worldbronchiectasisday.org. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.